What if I told you that the anxiety keeping you awake at night, that fear that everything might fall apart, is actually your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do, but pointed in the wrong direction? You've been taught that worry protects you, that constant vigilance keeps you safe. But here's what neuroscience actually shows. Your brain is wired to find patterns, to create predictions, to anticipate outcomes. And right now, you're using that extraordinary predictive machinery to rehearse disasters that statistically will never happen. The question isn't whether your life will work out. The question is, when will you retrain your neural networks to expect what's actually probable instead of what's merely possible? Before we dive deeper into this, I want to ask something simple. If you're finding value in what we're exploring here, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. And I'm genuinely curious. Leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I love knowing that we're having this conversation across time zones, across continents, across all the artificial boundaries that separate us. Now, let's continue. You're exhausted from trying to predict and prevent every possible negative outcome. You lie awake running simulations, calculating probabilities, gaming out scenarios. You've been told to stay positive, to trust the universe, but nobody's explained what that actually means when your amygdala is firing like it's responding to a genuine threat. You oscillate between forcing outcomes and freezing in uncertainty. And underneath it all is a neural pattern that keeps repeating, what if I'm not equipped for this? What if my brain isn't wired for success? I see you there, lying awake at 3 in the morning, your mind racing through every possible disaster scenario, your heart racing, your breath shallow, your body tense, as if you're actually facing a physical predator when all you're facing is uncertainty about tomorrow. I see you trying to think your way to safety, believing that if you just analyze enough, plan enough, worry enough, you'll somehow prevent the catastrophe your brain keeps predicting. And here's what I want you to understand from a neurological perspective. Your brain isn't broken. It's doing exactly what brains do. It's trying to keep you safe by predicting threats. The problem is that it's using outdated data, running predictions based on past experiences that may no longer be relevant, and treating uncertainty as if it were danger. Your amygdala can't tell the difference between actual threat and imagined threat. To your nervous system, they're the same thing. Right now, your nervous system is treating uncertainty like danger. You believe that hypervigilance prevents disaster, that anxiety is productive planning, that you must think your way to safety. This is your brain stuck in a threat detection loop, the constant cortisol flooding your system, the inability to access your prefrontal cortex when you need it most, the sense that you're always operating from your brainstem, your survival brain, instead of your higher cognitive functions. You're stuck in fight or flight mode even though there's nothing to fight and nowhere to run. But imagine this instead. You wake up and your brain automatically scans for safety, for possibility, for opportunity instead of threat. You make decisions from your executive brain, not your survival brain. You experience setbacks without your nervous system treating them like life-threatening emergencies. You have access to your full cognitive capacity because your amygdala isn't hijacking your entire system. You can think clearly, respond flexibly, and adapt effectively because your brain isn't burning all its resources on false alarms. Imagine your default state being calm alertness instead of anxious hypervigilance. Imagine your brain predicting positive outcomes as automatically as it now predicts negative ones. Imagine waking up without that immediate flood of cortisol, without your mind immediately cataloging everything that could go wrong. Imagine moving through your day with a baseline sense that you're equipped to handle whatever comes, that resources will be available when you need them, that things have a way of working out. Let me be clear about what acting as if everything works out is not. It's not positive thinking that ignores neurobiology. I've spent my career studying the brain, mapping neural pathways, understanding how prediction and perception actually work. I performed thousands of procedures, observed countless neural patterns, pushed the boundaries of what we understood about brain function. It's not wishful thinking that denies reality. You still acknowledge threats. You still prepare. You still use your magnificent cortex for actual problem solving. It's not spiritual bypassing that ignores the limbic system. Your amygdala exists for a reason. It's kept humans alive for millions of years. But it's not meant to run your entire life, to make every decision, to dominate every moment. This is about understanding how your predictive brain actually functions. Your brain is a prediction machine. This is not a metaphor or a motivational saying. This is the fundamental mechanism of how your brain operates. Your cortex is constantly generating forecasts about what will happen next based on past data, based on pattern recognition, based on previous experiences. And here's the critical part that changes everything. Those predictions shape your perception of present reality. They literally determine what you see, what you notice, what you experience as real. When you retrain your brain to predict positive outcomes, you're not denying reality. You're aligning with how neuroplasticity actually works. You're working with your brain's natural mechanisms, not against them. You're using the same predictive machinery that's been creating anxiety, but you're feeding it different data, training it toward different patterns. For decades, I've studied the human brain, mapped its structures, understood its mechanisms. I've worked at the frontier of neuroscience, exploring territories that others feared to enter. And what I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about how the mind works. The brain is not fixed. It's not hardwired with permanent patterns. It's not a static organ that you're stuck with for life. It's plastic, adaptive, constantly rewiring itself based on experience and attention. Your neural networks strengthen with use. This is the fundamental principle of neuroplasticity. The pathways you activate most frequently become your defaults. They become the superhighways your brain automatically travels. If you spend your time running worst-case scenarios, catastrophizing, predicting disaster, those neural pathways become incredibly strong, incredibly efficient. Your brain gets remarkably good at anxiety because you've trained it to be. But here's the beautiful part. You can train it differently. You can build new neural pathways. You can literally rewire your predictive machinery. Think about what this means. The anxiety you're experiencing, the constant worry, the inability to trust that things will work out. These aren't character flaws. They're not evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you. They're neural patterns. Patterns that were learned, patterns that were reinforced, patterns that became habitual. And what was learned can be unlearned. What was wired can be rewired. I know what it's like to face professional rejection, to have your ideas dismissed, to push forward despite overwhelming criticism. My work was controversial, to put it mildly. Many colleagues thought I was dangerous, reckless, crossing ethical boundaries. I faced opposition at every turn. But I understood something about the brain that most didn't. It's capable of radical change, not gradual, slow evolution over decades, but dramatic reorganization when you understand the mechanisms and apply them correctly. You are not stuck with the brain patterns you have now. You are not doomed to experience anxiety forever. You are not limited by your current neural architecture. You are exactly where you need to be to begin the rewiring process. And I know that sounds like empty reassurance when you're suffering, when your nervous system is activated, when your amygdala is running the show. But it's not reassurance. It's neuroscience. Now let me tell you a story that changed how I understood the brain's capacity for self-transformation. I had a patient, a brilliant man, accomplished in every external measure. He was an academic, respected in his field, about to receive a promotion he'd worked toward for 15 years. Department chair, recognition, status, everything he'd sacrificed for. And as the date approached, he began to deteriorate neurologically. Panic attacks that came out of nowhere. Insomnia so severe he wasn't sleeping more than 2 hours a night. His autonomic nervous system was in constant fight or flight despite there being no actual threat. He came to me desperate. "Dr. Freeman," he said, and I could see his hands shaking. "My brain is betraying me. I'm finally getting what I've worked for, and my body is treating it like a death sentence. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I can't think clearly. My heart races for no reason. I'm terrified I'm going to collapse during the appointment ceremony. What's wrong with me?" Most physicians would have diagnosed anxiety disorder, prescribed medication, perhaps recommended therapy. But I saw something different. I saw a nervous system that had been trained over decades to associate success with danger. We explored his history carefully. At age 8, his father, a stern and demanding man, told him something that would shape the next 30 years of his neural development. "You'll never amount to anything unless you suffer for it. Success without struggle is meaningless. Easy victories are worthless." From that moment, his brain wired a devastating association. Achievement equals threat to identity. His nervous system learned that ease meant danger, that success meant annihilation of self. His entire sense of who he was had been built around being the one who struggles, who suffers, who earns everything through pain. And now, on the verge of finally achieving the goal, his brain was interpreting it as an existential threat. If I succeed easily, if things work out, who am I? His amygdala was treating his upcoming success the way it would treat a charging bear. Same neural response, same flood of stress hormones, same activation of threat circuitry. But there was no bear. There was only a neural pattern that had learned to equate positive outcomes with identity dissolution. I gave him a neurological intervention that seemed radical at the time, though now I understand it as simply applied neuroplasticity. For 1 week, I said, "I want you to act as if your nervous system already knows you're safe, as if your brain already predicts positive outcomes, as if your neural networks are already wired for trust instead of threat. Walk as that person walks, speak as that person speaks, make decisions as that person makes them. Activate those neural pathways deliberately, consciously, consistently, even if they feel completely unfamiliar, even if they feel fake." He resisted, of course. "My brain doesn't work that way," he said. "I've tried positive thinking. It doesn't work. I can't just pretend my way out of panic attacks." "Exactly," I told him, "and that's why we're retraining it. This isn't positive thinking. This is neuroplasticity. This is creating new neural pathways through repeated activation. Neuroplasticity doesn't happen through thinking alone. It happens through experience, through action, through physically activating different neural circuits than the ones you've been using. Your brain learns from what you do, not just from what you think. You can think positive thoughts all day long, but if your behavior, your posture, your breathing, your movements are all communicating threat to your nervous system, your brain will ignore the thoughts and respond to the behavior. We needed to give his brain new experiential data. We needed to activate the neural circuits associated with safety, with trust, with positive prediction, and activate them so consistently that new pathways would form. He did it, and I'll be honest, it was uncomfortable for him at first. His anterior cingulate cortex was firing constantly, signaling mismatch, mismatch, Mismatch. His brain was saying, this doesn't fit the pattern. This isn't how we operate. This is unfamiliar territory. That discomfort is actually the feeling of neuroplasticity happening. It's the sensation of new neural pathways being built. Most people interpret that discomfort as evidence they're doing something wrong, so they stop. But he persisted, and something remarkable happened. His panic attacks stopped within days. Not gradually, not slowly. Within 4 days, they were gone. Not because the external situation changed, the promotion ceremony was still approaching. Not because he suddenly believed everything would be fine, but because he stopped sending his nervous system constant threat signals. He stopped activating the neural pathways associated with danger every time he thought about the promotion. 3 weeks later, he received the promotion. The ceremony went smoothly. But here's what matters. Here's the part that demonstrates the real neural change. By then, his nervous system had recalibrated. His brain had learned that success didn't mean danger. That achievement didn't mean annihilation. That things could work out without him needing to suffer for them. He'd created new neural associations through deliberate, consistent practice. His brain had literally rewired. When he came back to see me after the ceremony, I expected relief, happiness, excitement. Instead, what I saw was something deeper, something more profound. He looked at me and said, "Dr. Freeman, something has fundamentally changed. It's not just that the anxiety is gone. It's that I can feel that my brain works differently now. I can feel that my default predictions have shifted. I notice opportunities instead of threats. I expect support instead of opposition. My nervous system is calm in situations that would have triggered panic a month ago. How is that possible? It's possible because your brain is plastic, because neural patterns can be rewritten, because you gave your nervous system new data consistently enough that it reorganized around new predictions. You didn't just think differently. You acted differently, and your brain learned from those actions. Now you might be thinking, that's a fascinating story, Walter. But how does understanding neuroscience help me when I'm anxious right now? When my thoughts are racing, when I can't sleep, when everything feels overwhelming? Stay with me, because what I'm about to share will change how you understand your own brain and give you specific mechanisms you can use. Your brain is a prediction machine. This is mechanism, not metaphor. This is not a philosophical statement or a motivational concept. This is how your brain actually operates at the neurological level. Your cortex is constantly generating forecasts about what will happen next, and these predictions are based on pattern recognition from your past experiences. Your brain is looking at current data and asking, what does this remind me of? What happened before in similar situations? What pattern does this fit? And then it generates a prediction. Things will work out. Things won't work out. This person is safe. This person is dangerous. This situation is manageable. This situation is overwhelming. These predictions happen automatically, mostly outside conscious awareness, based on neural patterns formed over years or decades. But here's where it gets interesting, where understanding this mechanism gives you leverage. Your brain can't distinguish between accurate predictions and inaccurate ones until after the fact. In the moment the prediction is generated, your brain treats it as reality. It doesn't say maybe things won't work out. It says things won't work out, and then it prepares your body accordingly. So when your brain predicts that things won't work out, your nervous system responds as if that prediction is already true, as if it's observing reality rather than creating a forecast. Your cortisol rises, your heart rate increases, your blood pressure goes up, your digestion shuts down, your immune function suppresses, your prefrontal cortex goes offline, all because of a prediction, not a reality. All because your brain generated a forecast based on old data and then treated that forecast as fact. This is why anxiety feels so real, so physically overwhelming. Your body is responding to your brain's predictions as if they're observations of actual present danger. And then your conscious mind, feeling all these physical sensations, concludes that there must be real danger, which reinforces the prediction, which intensifies the physical response. It's a feedback loop. Prediction creates physiological response, creates confirmation of prediction, creates stronger physiological response. When you act as if everything is working out, you're not lying to your brain, you're not denying reality. You're feeding it different data to generate predictions from. You're saying, here's an alternative pattern to consider. Here's different evidence to weigh. Here's a new prediction to test. And when you do this repeatedly, with consistency, with commitment, something neurologically profound happens. Your brain starts weighing this new prediction more heavily. It starts creating neural pathways that support this prediction. It starts generating forecasts based on this new pattern instead of the old one. And eventually, through the mechanism of neuroplasticity, this becomes your default. Not because you convinced yourself of anything, not because you used willpower to override anxiety, but because you systematically retrained the predictive machinery of your brain through repeated experience. Let me give you a framework that makes this concrete. Imagine your brain is like a forest, and thoughts are like paths through that forest. The first time you have a particular thought, you're pushing through underbrush, forcing your way through dense vegetation. It's difficult. It requires effort. The path isn't clear. But if you take that same path again, it's slightly easier. Some of the brush has been displaced. If you take it a third time, fourth time, 10th time, 100th time, it becomes a clear trail. Eventually, it becomes a well-worn path, easy to travel, requiring no conscious effort. This is what neuroscientists call a neural pathway. Every time you think a thought, you're sending electrical signals along a particular route through your brain. Every time you send signals along the same route, that pathway becomes stronger, more myelinated, more efficient. Eventually, your brain defaults to that pathway automatically. You don't choose it consciously. Your brain just goes there because it's the path of least resistance. Right now, your most well-worn path might be the catastrophizing path. Something happens, any uncertainty appears, and boom, your brain automatically goes to worst-case scenario. You didn't decide to think that way. Your brain just went there automatically because that neural pathway is so well established, so deeply grooved. That's not a character flaw. That's just neural habit. But here's the beautiful part. You can create new paths. And the more you walk a new path, the clearer it becomes, while the old path, from lack of use, begins to fade. The underbrush grows back. It becomes harder to travel. Eventually, if you consistently take the new path and avoid the old one, the new path becomes your default, and the old one becomes overgrown, difficult to access even if you wanted to. This is neural rewiring. This is neuroplasticity. This is your brain's natural adaptation process, and you can direct it deliberately through consistent practice. Your reticular activating system is a network of neurons at the base of your brainstem that functions as a filter between your unconscious processing and your conscious awareness. Right now, this very second, there are millions of pieces of sensory information available to you. The pressure of your body against the chair or floor, the temperature of the air on your skin, the subtle sounds in the background, the play of light in your peripheral vision, the sensations inside your body, the rhythm of your breathing, thousands and thousands of data points. But you're not consciously aware of most of them because your RAS filters them out based on what your brain has deemed important, based on what patterns your brain is looking for. Your RAS is asking, what matters right now? What's relevant? What should I bring to conscious attention? And it makes those decisions based on your existing predictions, beliefs, and neural patterns. If your brain predicts threat, if your dominant neural pattern is anxiety and worry, your RAS highlights information that confirms threat. The rejection, the setback, the criticism, the sign that something might go wrong. It literally filters out or minimizes contradictory information, the opportunity that appeared, the support someone offered, the evidence that things are actually okay, the problem that resolved itself. Not because these positive things don't exist, they're there in reality. But your RAS is filtering them out because they don't fit the pattern your brain is looking for. Your brain is looking for threat, so that's what it shows you. This creates a distorted perception of reality, where you genuinely believe things don't work out for you because that's all you see. But it's not all that's happening. It's just all that's getting through your neural filter. When you shift your predictive framework to things are working out, your RAS recalibrates. It starts looking for different patterns. It starts highlighting different data. You start noticing the synchronicities, the unexpected support, the way problems resolve, the opportunities that appear. Not because reality changed, but because you're finally perceiving what was always there. You're accessing information your brain was previously filtering out. I had a patient who was convinced she was cursed in relationships. Every man disappointed her. Every relationship ended badly. And she had years of evidence to support this belief. Her brain had catalogued every rejection, every disappointment, every failure. But as we mapped her actual relationship history, I noticed something fascinating. She'd completely filtered out the positive experiences, the men who had been kind to her, the relationships that had ended amicably, the times she'd been supported. These didn't fit her pattern, so her RAS had filtered them out, hadn't stored them prominently in memory. Even more interesting, she was filtering out positive possibilities in real time. Healthy, available men would show interest, but she wouldn't notice, or would interpret their interest as suspicious. What's wrong with them? Why would they like me? But unavailable men, men who fit her pattern of disappointment, she noticed immediately and felt drawn to. Her RAS was highlighting the data that confirmed her predictions and filtering out the data that contradicted them. When we retrained her neural predictions, when she started acting as if healthy relationships were possible for her, her RAS recalibrated. She started noticing the healthy men who had been there all along. She started recognizing support when it was offered. She started seeing evidence that contradicted her old pattern. And her relationships transformed, not because different men suddenly appeared, but because she finally allowed herself to perceive and receive what had always been available. Why is it so difficult to believe things will work out? Because your brain has constructed an entire identity from your existing neural patterns. The struggler, the anxious one, the person for whom things are difficult, the one who never catches a break. This isn't just a story you tell. It's encoded in your neural architecture. Your sense of self, your identity, is a pattern of neural activation that your brain has learned and now maintains automatically. And your brain works hard to maintain consistency in that pattern because consistency equals safety from a neurological perspective. Your brain prefers a familiar hell to an unfamiliar heaven because the familiar is predictable. And predictability feels safe, even when it feels bad. The unfamiliar, even when it's positive, activates uncertainty circuits in your brain, and uncertainty can trigger threat responses. So, when you start acting as if things work out, when you start activating neural patterns associated with trust and positive outcomes, your brain can actually resist because it threatens the established identity pattern. It's not that you don't want to feel better. It's that feeling better would require becoming neurologically different, and that triggers resistance at the neural level. Acting as if everything works out requires neuroplasticity at the identity level. It means allowing your sense of self to reorganize around new neural patterns. It means being willing to become someone your brain doesn't fully recognize. It means tolerating the discomfort of unfamiliarity while new patterns stabilize. This is why people self-sabotage right before breakthrough. Not because they're weak or broken, but because their brain is trying to maintain neural consistency, to preserve the familiar identity pattern, even if that pattern causes suffering. But here's what your brain doesn't understand. You can maintain continuity of self while changing neural patterns. You don't lose yourself. You become more fully yourself. You're not abandoning who you are. You're shedding patterns that were never truly you in the first place, patterns that were formed by circumstances that may no longer be relevant. Here's something that will change how you relate to your own physiology. Anxiety and excitement produce identical neurochemistry. Identical. Let me say that again because it's crucial. When you're anxious and when you're excited, your brain releases the same neurotransmitters, norepinephrine, cortisol, adrenaline. Your heart rate elevates, your breathing quickens, your pupils dilate, your muscles tense, blood flow increases. You experience butterflies in your stomach. All the same physical sensations. The only difference, and this is critical, this is where your leverage lies. The only difference is the cognitive interpretation your prefrontal cortex assigns to these sensations. Anxiety is when your cortex interprets the arousal as threat, as danger, as evidence that something bad is about to happen. Excitement is when your cortex interprets the same arousal as anticipation, as preparation, as energy available for engaging with opportunity. Same neurochemistry, same body sensations. Completely different subjective experience based solely on how your thinking brain frames what your body is doing. When you practice acting as if things work out, you're not eliminating the arousal. Your nervous system will still activate in response to uncertainty, to challenges, to new situations. That's normal. That's adaptive. That activation is your brain mobilizing resources, preparing you to engage. But you're retraining the interpretive framework. You're teaching your prefrontal cortex to interpret arousal differently. That flutter in your stomach before taking a risk? Your cortex can frame it as danger. Oh no, something bad might happen. Or as readiness. My body is preparing me to engage fully. The elevated heart rate before an important moment, your brain can interpret it as panic. I can't handle this. Or as mobilization. My system is activating resources I need. Same sensation, completely different neural interpretation, completely different experience. I had a patient with severe performance anxiety. She couldn't give presentations at work, couldn't speak in meetings. Her nervous system would activate so strongly before any public speaking that she'd experienced nausea, shaking, tunnel vision. She'd convinced herself she had a brain abnormality that made public speaking impossible for her neurologically. But as we explored her patterns, we discovered something fascinating. Her nervous system was actually preparing her to perform. That's what the activation was. Mobilization of resources, heightened alertness, increased energy. But her prefrontal cortex was interpreting that preparation as malfunction, as panic, as evidence she couldn't do it. So every time her body prepared to perform, her conscious mind interpreted it as proof she was failing, which intensified the arousal, which reinforced the interpretation. Another feedback loop. I taught her to pause when she felt that activation and ask herself one simple question. What if this is my brain getting ready instead of falling apart? What if this arousal is adaptive, not pathological? What if my nervous system is saying, yes, I'm prepared, let's do this, instead of no, danger, run away? Within months, she was doing things that had previously paralyzed her. Speaking at conferences, leading meetings, taking professional risks. Not because the arousal stopped. She still felt the elevated heart rate, the butterflies, the surge of energy, but she'd reprogrammed the interpretation. She'd retrained her prefrontal cortex to frame the sensations differently, and that reframing changed everything. Let me distinguish between two types of neural response, because this is where people often get confused. Learned helplessness is when your brain concludes through repeated experience that your actions don't affect outcomes, so it stops generating adaptive responses. This is passive. This is your prefrontal cortex going offline because it's learned that effort doesn't matter. This is neurological resignation. This is depression at the brain level. Adaptive trust is something completely different. Adaptive trust is when your brain takes action, engages fully, uses all your cognitive resources, while maintaining flexible predictions about outcomes. This is your executive brain staying online, staying active, staying engaged. This is your prefrontal cortex functioning optimally. This is using your full intelligence while your emotional brain stays regulated instead of hijacking the whole system. Acting as if everything works out means your prefrontal cortex stays active. You still plan, you still analyze, you still problem solve, you still prepare, you still use all your magnificent cognitive abilities, but you do so without your amygdala constantly triggering threat responses that shut down your higher reasoning. You operate from your whole brain, your integrated brain, not just your survival brain. You make better decisions because you have access to your executive function. You see more options because your perception isn't narrowed by threat response. You think more creatively because your brain isn't burning all its resources on anxiety. You connect more effectively with others because your social brain isn't offline. You're more effective, not less, because your full neural capacity is available. Now I know what you're thinking. This neuroscience is fascinating, Walter, but how do I actually rewire these patterns? How do I shift from my overactive amygdala to my adaptive prefrontal cortex? How do I retrain predictions that feel hardwired? Let me give you specific neurological interventions you can implement immediately, starting today, that will begin the rewiring process. Every morning, before your cortex fully activates, before your default mode network kicks in with its habitual worry patterns, before you check your phone or engage with external demands, ask yourself one simple question. What would I do today if my brain predicted positive outcomes? Not what do I need to do to prevent disaster, not what should I do to protect myself from all possible threats, but what would I do? How would I show up? What choices would I make if my brain already expected things to work out? Maybe you'd send that email without obsessively revising it 17 times, without catastrophizing about every possible interpretation. Maybe you'd have that difficult conversation you've been avoiding without running every worst-case scenario first. Maybe you'd take that small risk toward a goal that matters to you. Maybe you'd rest without guilt because your brain isn't telling you that constant vigilance is necessary. Maybe you'd reach out to someone without assuming rejection. Maybe you'd apply for that opportunity without convincing yourself you're not qualified. This question activates different neural networks than your habitual patterns. It engages your ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the region involved in reward-based decision-making. It accesses your executive function operating from possibility rather than protection. Write down the first answer that comes. Don't overthink it. Don't judge it. Don't analyze whether it's realistic or practical. Just write it. Then do that thing. Even if it's small, even if it feels uncomfortable, you're creating new neural pathways through action, not just through thought. Your brain learns through repetition and attention. Every evening, this is crucial. Every single evening for the next 30 days minimum, write down 3 pieces of evidence that things worked out today. You're deliberately directing your attention toward data your RAS has been filtering out. You're retraining your reticular activating system to highlight different patterns. These don't need to be big things. In fact, it's better if they're small things, ordinary things, everyday evidence of life working. I found a parking spot easily. Someone held the door for me. That problem I was worried about resolved itself. I had an insight I needed. A friend texted right when I was thinking about them. The traffic light turned green just as I approached. My body healed that small injury without me doing anything. I woke up rested. I received unexpected money. Someone smiled at me and it felt good. Do this for 30 days minimum. You're literally retraining your reticular activating system. Neuroplasticity requires consistency, not intensity. It's better to do this 5 minutes every day for 30 days than to do it intensely for a weekend and then stop. Your brain needs repeated, consistent activation of new patterns to rewire. When something goes wrong, and things will go wrong because that's life, immediately activate your prefrontal cortex by asking one question. If this is adaptive, what function might it serve? You're engaging your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for cognitive reappraisal, instead of letting your amygdala run the response unchecked. Maybe this rejection is protecting you from a situation that wouldn't have served you. Maybe this delay is synchronizing timing you can't yet see. Maybe this obstacle is developing a capacity you're going to need for what comes next. Maybe this disappointment is redirecting you towards something more aligned. Maybe this ending is clearing space for a better beginning. This isn't denial. This isn't toxic positivity that dismisses real pain. This is cognitive reappraisal, one of the most powerful neurological tools for emotional regulation. You're using your thinking brain to generate alternative interpretations before your emotional brain locks into a maladaptive response. You're staying in your executive function instead of dropping into your survival function. 3 times daily. This is non-negotiable if you want neural change. Embody the posture and breathing pattern of someone whose nervous system is regulated. Shoulders back but relaxed. Spine elongated but not rigid. Chest open, head balanced on your spine. Breath slow and deep into your diaphragm, not shallow and rapid into your chest. 4 count in, 6 count out, or whatever rhythm feels natural as long as the exhale is longer than the inhale. This isn't pretending. This isn't fake it till you make it. This is using your body to regulate your brain. This is bottom-up processing. Your vagus nerve, which connects your brainstem to your organs, responds to postural changes and breathing patterns. When you breathe slowly with long exhales, you directly activate your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, which inhibits your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system. When you stand or sit with open posture, you're sending safety signals to your brainstem. When you move with fluid ease instead of tension and bracing, you're communicating to your nervous system that there's no threat present. Your brain receives this information and adjusts accordingly. 60 seconds, 3 times daily, morning, midday, evening. You're training your nervous system to default to regulation instead of dysregulation. Your brain learns most effectively during sleep. During deep sleep, your brain clears metabolic waste. During REM sleep, your brain consolidates memories, strengthens important neural connections, prunes unnecessary ones. Your brain is literally deciding which neural patterns to keep and which to discard based on what you've been activating during your waking hours. In the moments before sleep, when your brain waves are transitioning from beta to alpha, when you're in that threshold state between waking and sleeping, you're in a highly suggestible neurological state. Your prefrontal cortex is going offline, which means the critical, analytical part of your brain that might resist suggestions is quieting. Your unconscious processing is more accessible. Use this deliberately. As you're falling asleep, say to yourself, silently or aloud, "My brain is safe to predict positive outcomes. my nervous system can relax its vigilance. My neural networks are rewiring toward trust and possibility. I'm allowing new patterns to form while I sleep. You're giving your brain specific instructions about what to consolidate and strengthen during its overnight maintenance and what patterns to begin dissolving. Then let go. Don't force it. Don't lie there trying to make something happen. Just plant the seed and allow your brain to do its work during sleep. Many people report waking with insights, with solutions to problems that seemed unsolvable, with a shift in nervous system state, with a sense of peace they didn't have the night before. That's neuroplasticity happening during sleep. Every week, review evidence of neural predictions that proved accurate. The conversation that went better than you expected. The problem that resolved itself in a way you couldn't have predicted. The opportunity that appeared from an unexpected direction. The support someone offered that surprised you. The way your body healed itself. The insight that came when you stopped forcing. You're strengthening the neural networks associated with positive prediction. You're teaching your brain through concrete evidence that expecting positive outcomes actually correlates with reality, that trusting life is empirically justified based on your actual experience, not just wishful thinking. You're building a new database of pattern recognition for your predictive machinery to draw from. Let me leave you with this final framework that ties everything together. Acting as if everything works out isn't positive thinking that ignores neuroscience. It's applied neuroplasticity. It's understanding that your brain is not a fixed organ with permanent patterns, but a dynamic, responsive, constantly adapting system that reorganizes itself based on experience, attention, and repeated practice. Your brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons, each capable of forming thousands of synaptic connections. The possible configurations of neural networks in your brain exceed the number of atoms in the known universe. You have more potential neural patterns available to you than there are stars in the sky. And yet, most people operate from a tiny fraction of their brain's potential, locked into habitual patterns formed years or decades ago by circumstances that may no longer be relevant. But it doesn't have to be this way. Every moment is an opportunity for neuroplasticity. Every experience is data your brain can learn from. Every thought you think, every action you take, every emotion you feel is either strengthening existing neural pathways or creating new ones. You are, at every moment, participating in the construction of your own neural architecture. The only question is whether you're doing so consciously or unconsciously, deliberately or by default. When you act as if everything is working out, you're taking conscious control of your brain's adaptation process. You're deliberately directing neuroplasticity toward patterns that serve you. You're becoming the architect of your own neural landscape instead of a passive passenger in brain patterns formed by accident and circumstance. Think about the implications of this. Your anxiety, your chronic worry, your inability to trust that things will work out. These aren't character flaws. They're not evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you as a person. They're not permanent features of your identity. They're neural patterns. Patterns that formed for specific reasons. Patterns that made sense given your experiences. Patterns that may have even served a protective function at one time. But patterns can change. Neural pathways that aren't being used weaken over time. This is called synaptic pruning. Your brain is constantly eliminating connections that aren't reinforced, clearing out old wiring that's no longer needed. And neural pathways that are consistently activated strengthen and become dominant. This is called long-term potentiation. The pathways you use become more myelinated, more efficient, more automatic. You are not stuck with the brain you have today. The brain you have 6 months from now will be measurably different because neuroplasticity never stops. Your brain is always changing. The only question is, different in which direction? Toward greater rigidity or greater flexibility? Toward more fear or more trust? Toward narrower patterns or broader possibilities? You get to influence that direction through where you consistently direct your attention and action. I've seen brains transformed. I've watched neural patterns that seemed absolutely fixed, that had been operating for decades, dissolve and new patterns emerge. I've observed people whose brain function was so impaired by anxiety and depression that they could barely function in daily life, and through targeted interventions based on neuroplasticity principles, watch their brains reorganize into healthier configurations. The brain's capacity for change is extraordinary, almost miraculous, and it's available to you right now. Every single practice I've given you is designed to leverage specific neuroplastic mechanisms. The morning question activates your prefrontal cortex and engages reward-based decision-making circuitry. The evening evidence journal retrains your reticular activating system to highlight different patterns in incoming data. The cognitive reappraisal when things go wrong strengthens your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and builds the neural pathways that inhibit amygdala reactivity. The embodied practice regulates your autonomic nervous system through bottom-up mechanisms. The sleep time suggestions work with your brain's overnight consolidation processes. These aren't random exercises, they're precisely targeted neural interventions based on decades of neuroscience research. And the beautiful thing is that these practices create compound effects, synergistic effects. As you strengthen one neural pathway, it makes other changes easier. As you reduce your baseline stress through better predictions, your prefrontal cortex functions better because it's not being inhibited by chronic cortisol. As your prefrontal cortex functions better, you make decisions that further reduce stress. As you increase your positive predictions, you notice more positive evidence through your retrained RAS. As you notice more positive evidence, your predictions become more positive. Virtuous cycles replace vicious cycles. Your brain also exhibits what we call metaplasticity, which means that the degree to which your brain can change itself changes based on your recent experiences with change. If you've experienced a lot of neural adaptation recently, your brain becomes more plastic, more adaptable to further change. It's like your brain learns how to learn, becomes skilled at rewiring itself. If you've been stuck in rigid patterns for a long time, your brain becomes less plastic, more resistant to change because the mechanisms of change haven't been activated recently. But here's the encouraging part. You can increase your brain's metaplasticity through deliberate practice. By consistently engaging in novel experiences, by practicing the exercises I've given you, by repeatedly activating new neural patterns, you're not just creating those specific patterns, you're increasing your brain's overall capacity for change. You're making your brain more plastic, more adaptable, more capable of further transformation. You're building the infrastructure for change. This is why people often report that neural rewiring accelerates over time. The first few weeks are hard. The brain is rigid, resistant. The old patterns are so deeply grooved that new patterns feel extremely unnatural. But as you persist, as you build momentum, the brain becomes more plastic. Change becomes easier. New patterns form more quickly. What took weeks initially starts happening in days. Your brain develops facility with adaptation itself. Let's talk about something called neural reserve, because this is crucial for long-term brain health. Neural reserve is your brain's capacity to function well even under challenge. It's like having backup systems, redundant pathways, alternative routes. People with greater neural reserve can handle stress, can adapt to challenges, can even withstand brain injury better than those with less reserve. How do you build neural reserve? Through the same mechanisms that drive neuroplasticity: learning new skills, engaging with novelty, exercising, maintaining social connections, and managing stress. When you practice acting as if everything works out, you're building neural reserve. You're not just fixing current patterns, you're creating backup pathways, alternative routes, redundant systems. You're making your brain more robust, more resilient, more capable of maintaining function even when challenged. This is prevention at the neurological level. You're fortifying your brain against future challenges, against aging, against the inevitable stresses of life. Your brain's energy metabolism is also crucial to understand. Your brain represents only 2% of your body weight but consumes 20% of your body's energy. 20%. It's an incredibly expensive organ to run, and different neural patterns require different amounts of energy. Chronic anxiety and worry are neurologically expensive. They keep large networks activated constantly, burning through glucose and oxygen at an unsustainable rate. This is part of why chronic stress is so exhausting, why anxiety leaves you depleted. Acting as if everything works out is more energetically efficient. When your brain isn't constantly running threat detection protocols, when your prefrontal cortex isn't constantly trying to override your amygdala, when your nervous system isn't chronically activated for no actual reason, you have more neural energy available. You think more clearly because your brain has resources to allocate to actual thinking. You have more mental stamina because you're not depleting your resources on unnecessary vigilance. You're less cognitively fatigued at the end of the day because your brain has been operating efficiently. This energy efficiency creates a positive feedback loop. As your neural patterns become more efficient, you have more energy available for learning and adaptation. As you learn and adapt, your patterns become even more efficient. Your brain begins operating at a higher level of function with less effort. You're accessing flow states more easily. You're thinking more clearly. You're making better decisions. All because you're not burning your resources on maladaptive neural patterns. The concept of attractor states is useful here. Think of your brain as having multiple possible stable patterns of activation, like valleys in a landscape. Your current pattern, the anxiety and negative prediction, is a deep valley. Your brain naturally falls into it because it's the most grooved, most stable pattern available. This is your dominant attractor state. It takes very little energy for your brain to fall into this pattern because the valley is so deep. But through consistent practice, you can create a new attractor state, a new valley. Initially, it's very shallow. Your brain easily slides back into the old, deeper valley. But every time you deliberately activate the new pattern, you're making that new valley slightly deeper, slightly more stable. You're increasing the probability that your brain will fall into the new pattern instead of the old one. Eventually, there's a tipping point. The new attractor state becomes deeper, more stable than the old one. Your brain starts defaulting to the new pattern. The old pattern is still there. You could still activate it if you tried, but it's no longer your default. You've fundamentally reorganized your brain's landscape. This is deep structural change, not superficial change. This is your brain reorganizing at the level of attractor dynamics. This tipping point doesn't happen through occasional practice or when you feel like it. It happens through consistent, persistent activation of new patterns until they become more grooved, more stable than the old ones. This requires commitment. This requires patience. This requires trust in the process even before you see results. Trust that your brain is rewiring even when you can't yet feel it. Trust that the neuroplasticity is happening even when results aren't yet obvious. Let me address the role of neurochemistry more directly, because this is how change translates into subjective experience. Your brain operates on neurotransmitters: dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA, glutamate. These chemicals determine your mood, your energy, your motivation, your ability to feel pleasure, your capacity for calm. And here's what most people don't realize. Your thoughts, your predictions, your behaviors directly influence your neurochemistry. When you engage in catastrophic thinking, when your brain is constantly predicting threat, you're triggering cortisol release while suppressing dopamine and serotonin. When you practice gratitude, when you predict positive outcomes, when you activate reward anticipation circuits, you're increasing serotonin and dopamine while reducing cortisol. These aren't just correlations. These are causal relationships. Your cognitive patterns directly alter your brain chemistry, which then reinforces those cognitive patterns. Acting as if everything works out is a neurochemical intervention. Every time you redirect your attention toward evidence that things are working out, you're triggering a small dopamine release. Every time you reframe a challenge as an opportunity, you're reducing cortisol. Every time you practice embodied confidence, you're increasing testosterone while reducing stress hormones. You're using behavioral interventions to alter your neurochemistry, which then makes the behavioral interventions easier to maintain. Another virtuous cycle. Your gut-brain axis is also involved in this process. Your enteric nervous system, the network of neurons in your gut, communicates constantly with your brain through the vagus nerve and through hormonal and immune signaling. Chronic stress disrupts your gut microbiome, increases intestinal permeability, triggers inflammatory responses that affect brain function. This is why anxiety often comes with digestive issues. They're not separate problems. They're manifestations of one dysregulated system. When you reduce stress through these practices, your gut-brain axis improves. Your microbiome becomes healthier. Inflammation decreases. The signals traveling from your gut to your brain become more positive. This supports better mood, better cognitive function, better overall brain health. You're healing the system at multiple levels simultaneously through a single intervention focused on neural patterns. Let me talk about the social dimension of all this, because your brain is profoundly social. Your neural patterns are constantly influenced by your social environment. Mirror neurons throughout your brain fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing that action. This is the neurological basis of empathy, of social learning, of cultural transmission. When you're around anxious people, your mirror neurons activate anxious patterns. When you're around calm, confident people, your mirror neurons activate those patterns. Your nervous system state is contagious and caught from others. This is why social environment matters so much for neural change. If you're trying to rewire toward trust and positive prediction while surrounded by people who constantly catastrophize, it's neurologically much harder. But it works in reverse too. As you change your neural patterns, as you begin acting as if things work out, you influence the people around you through mirror neuron activation. Your regulated nervous system helps regulate theirs. Your positive predictions prime theirs. You become a source of neural influence in your environment. This is how change spreads socially, through neural resonance. The timeline for significant neural change varies based on many factors: the depth of existing patterns, the consistency of new practice, your overall brain health, your stress levels, your sleep quality, your nutrition, whether you're exercising. But research on neuroplasticity suggests that measurable functional changes can occur within 2 to 4 weeks of consistent practice, and structural changes typically become evident within 2 to 3 months. This isn't instant, but it's also not as slow as you might think. I've seen people experience noticeable shifts within 2 to 3 weeks of daily practice. Not complete transformation, but enough change to create hope, to provide evidence that the approach is working, to fuel continued commitment. By 6 to 8 weeks, most people report substantial differences in their baseline state, in their default predictions, in their nervous system regulation. By 3 to 6 months, the changes often feel natural, permanent, like this is just how their brain works now. But you must be consistent. Sporadic practice doesn't create lasting neural change. Your brain needs repeated, consistent activation of new patterns to rewire. Think of it like physical exercise. One workout doesn't build muscle. You might feel slightly different after one workout, but no lasting change occurs. But consistent workouts over months transform your physique, your strength, your cardiovascular capacity. Neural training works exactly the same way. Consistent practice over time transforms your neural architecture. Every AX week, review evidence of neural predictions that proved accurate, the conversation that went well, the problem that resolved. You're strengthening the neural networks associated with positive prediction. You're teaching your brain that expecting positive outcomes actually correlates with reality. Let me leave you with this. Acting as if everything works out isn't positive thinking that ignores neuroscience. It's applied neuroplasticity. Your brain is not fixed. Your neural patterns are not permanent. Your predictions are not destiny. You have an organ capable of profound adaptation, and you can direct that adaptation deliberately. Every moment of your life has been shaping your neural architecture, and every new experience can reshape those patterns. Your brain is plastic, adaptive, constantly reorganizing itself, and you can participate in that reorganization through deliberate attention, repeated practice, and consistent redirection. You're not here to be trapped by maladaptive neural patterns. You're here to discover that your brain is capable of rewriting its own code. Every challenge is an opportunity for neuroplasticity. Every obstacle is an invitation for your brain to generate new solutions. Here is your neural reprogramming statement. Say it when you wake. Say it when your amygdala activates. My brain predicts positive outcomes. My nervous system is safe. My neural networks are rewiring toward trust and possibility. What is mine will activate the right neural patterns. Everything is working at the neurological level. If this resonated with you, if you felt your nervous system relax even slightly, subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment sharing your experience with neuroplasticity, with retraining your predictions, with that moment when you realized your brain wasn't fixed but adaptive. Until next time, remember your brain's capacity for change. Remember that your neural patterns are not permanent. Trust your brain's ability to rewire itself. Everything is working at the neurological level. It always has been, and it always will be.